welcome everybody to the Town of Carlisle Board of Selectmen meeting of Tuesday, May 26th. I'm going to quickly read the agenda. At 7 p.m. community input, 7:05 local emergency planning committee update. I believe 7:15 vote about the deficit spending is being put off. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so we won't be having that agenda item. 7:30, Superintendent Lori Hunter from the regional will come and ask for a letter of support for doing the 1/12 budgeting. At 8 p.m., finalizing the town meeting warrant and setting a date and time. At 8:15, town administrators report. 8:25, liaison reports. And at 8:35, we will adjourn to executive session for exemption number 1 to hear a complaint against a public officer. And then we will not come back to open meeting. All right, community input. If there is anybody here who has some community input, if you know how to raise your hand by going to the participants button, and then there's a little button at the bottom of that list. It says raise hand. You can raise your hand to be recognized. Or if you would prefer, you could do a chat and submit a chat question or comment or whatever, just to let me know that you're there and would like to be recognized. Okay, and seeing none, unless somebody else is seeing something I am missing. I'd like to go on to the 7:05 agenda item of the LEPC update. And I recognize John Fisher, Chief Fisher.
All thanks, Kate. Just real briefly tonight, we had an LEPC meeting this morning. Not a lot has changed. Our total cases reported so far in Carlisle are 23. We're hoping that we've peaked out and we're on our way down. Conversations with Linda Fantasia today, she believes that's where we are. It's 15 confirmed cases and 8 probable, which we treat like confirmed cases. Other than that, I think the focus has really been on what we call it a soft opening of Town Hall beginning next Monday on June 1st. We feel pretty good about the plans that you folks have reviewed and that the Town Hall folks have spent some time talking about, and we talked about again today on the Town Hall employees meeting. So anyone in Carlisle that has an interest in setting up an appointment, it's something that cannot be done virtually. Should be able to do that, to be able to meet with someone in Town Hall. You should be able to schedule that meeting beginning on June 1st, next Monday. And that's really kind of been our focus. And then we've been in an advisory role for the town election and for our town meeting. But unless anyone has any specific questions, that's what I have for now, Kate.
Thank you. Are there any people with questions from the board? And I don't see anybody raising hands. No. Okay. Thank you very much, Chief. As Tim, as part of the planning update, should we be considering Peggy's letter for asking for
Reduced polling hours?
Polling
Yes.
hours, because this is a direct outcome of the COVID.
Right. Well, we can either do it under the LEPC update or later on in the agenda under the town meeting warrant discussion, as the election warrant is part of the town meeting discussion. But if you'd like to get it out of the way, you could have that discussion now. And we do have a little bit of time with the second agenda item being postponed.
Yeah, we do. And so I'd kind of like to get this out of the way, I guess. Did everybody get this letter, a copy of the letter?
Yes.
Yeah, and you all had a chance to read it?
Yes.
Is there anybody has any questions, comments, concerns?
Just people may want to know why this has happened. Is we're trying to have a reduced hours for town hall. It both limits the exposure of the poll workers, and we're heavily encouraging people to do early voting and absentee voting. So if you don't have to come to town hall, that option is available to you, and we're encouraging everybody to take advantage of it. But we're essentially just going to divide it up into 2 4-hour positions, and we extended it into the evening so that people who do work will have a chance to come in. If they can't early vote, they'll still be able to come into town hall and cast their vote that way.
So it'll be on one day on June 30th from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. and 11 a.m. No, that's what it says on this letter. So
It's reduced from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m.
Sorry, reduced from 7 to 8 to 11 to 7.
Correct.
Okay, got it. Sorry, didn't read that correctly. All right.
Is that something we need to vote on, or we can just do that as part of the town?
The board should vote on that.
I think we should.
If that's your intention,
Yep.
yes.
I would move that the voting hours on June 30th be reduced from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. to 11 a.m. to 7 p.m.
Second?
Second.
Okay, there was a second from Luke. There was a motion from Alan Lewis and a second from Luke. Any further discussion? It's a roll call vote. All those in favor?
Arnold, I.
Oscar aye.
Brown eye.
Lewis, aye.
Reed, aye. Okay, and this will probably come up again because the one thing is, depending on whether we put our warrant out, we may have to put some other notice of the out, don't we? Depending upon when we have our town meeting, because
This is the election.
I understand, but the warrant, whatever it's called, in the back of the warrant book, there is, where is it? It's
Description.
election of officers. There's a thing that says that the warrant is the posting of the election. And because we don't do our posting of our election separate from our warrant. That's what I understood. You want to help me out here, Tim?
Yeah, though that's correct. That the town clerk was hoping you'd vote the reduced polling hours tonight. She has a mailing prepared to go to every address in town, and she was just waiting to fill in the timing of the election. That'll go out shortly.
Because normally it is noticed in our warrant, and
It's all part of one warrant. Yes.
If we don't send our warrant out, nobody would be noticed. And if we do send our warrant out, our current warrant still says 7 a.m. to
Correct. Yeah.
8 p.m. So we would have to change that as well. Okay. Just
Tim, is she including anything about the mail-in option?
Yes.
Yeah,
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's
great.
very much encouraged. In
Yeah.
fact.
and she'll explain how that's done in the letter, and so that people won't have to be looking things up online in order to figure it out, et cetera.
And I assume the mosquito will also include that, or there'll be something sent to the mosquitoes so they can
Yes.
find people. Yeah,
And hopefully they'll publicize it as well.
good.
Okay. We are at 7:13. Our 7:15 agenda item is not going to be taken up, and we are waiting for the superintendent. So what I would like to do is to jump down to the town administrator's report on the proclamations that we have prepared.
Yes, those are really the only items in my report this week. We have proclamations for the 8th graders graduating at Carlisle Public School, and also for the seniors who are graduating at Concord Carlisle High School.
Okay, I would like to read those proclamations, and then we can have a vote as to whether we want to adopt them and post them.
Just real quickly, Kate, would you mind if I read the one for the high school, since
I
I'm a
would
high
be-
schooler?
I would be very happy for you to do so.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else want to read the proclamation for the 8th grade graduation? Okay, I'll start with the 8th grade. Proclamation honoring Carlisle Public School 8th grade graduation. The end of the 8th grade year is an exciting time to celebrate the successful completion of middle school and the significant rite of passage into high school. The Board of Selectmen wishes to recognize and honor our 8th grade students. We applaud their growth and accomplishments and encourage them as they launch into the next phase of their academic careers. Whereas the 2019-2020 academic year and commencement ceremonies have been suspended due to global coronavirus pandemic. And whereas families, friends, neighbors, and educators should encourage everyone to focus on the achievements of all young people and honor their diligent efforts. And whereas the most effective way to honor graduating 8th grade students is to raise awareness of the merits of education and successes through active community involvement by realizing each individual's abilities, contribution, and the significance of education. Now, therefore, the Board of Selectmen, on behalf of the town of Carlisle, specifically the 8th grade graduating class, do hereby proclaim the day of June 18th, 2020 as Class of 2020 Day within the town of Carlisle.
So moved.
Second.
And roll call vote.
Arnold, an enthusiastic eye.
Oscar Aye.
Brown eye.
Lewis, I.
And Reed, aye. Okay, and Nathan, would you read the
Sure,
proclamation? please?
I appreciate you giving me the opportunity. I do have a high school senior, class of 2020. I move the following proclamation honoring the Concord Carlisle Regional High School class of 2020. May is a milestone for students of our community as it is high school graduation month. It is an opportunity for expanding education, acknowledging this unprecedented time, and recognizing the accomplishments of our young adults with a commemorative day in their honor. Whereas the 2019-2020 academic year and commencement ceremonies have been suspended due to the global coronavirus pandemic, and whereas families, friends, neighbors, and educators should encourage everyone to focus on the achievements of all young people and honor their diligent efforts, and whereas the most effective way to honor graduating seniors is to raise awareness of the merits of education and successes through active community involvement by realizing each individual's abilities, contribution, and the significance of education. And whereas we urge all community members to support opportunities for graduating seniors that include higher education, military service, housing, trades, employment, and recreational activities. Now, therefore, the Board of Selectmen, on behalf of the town of Carlisle, specifically graduating seniors, do hereby proclaim the day of May 30th, 2020 as Class of 2020 Day within the town of Carlisle. Throughout the town of Carlisle, we encourage all citizens to take time to get to know a graduating senior, recognize their goals and contributions, and support them in their educational excellence. Signed, the Board of Selectmen, May 26, 2020.
So move.
Second,
All right, that's moved by Alan, seconded by Barney. And I would like to have a roll call vote, please.
Arnold, another enthusiastic eye.
Oscar Aye.
Brown eye.
Lewis, I.
And Reed, aye. Thank
Excellent.
you.
Congratulations
much.
to all our graduates.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I'm, my own son, he didn't graduate from high school or college. Actually, he got his master's, and his girlfriend made him, the mortar board and a robe out of a plastic garbage. We all have to celebrate these things in new and unusual ways. So, but I think this is a nice way, and I think, honestly, I think maybe we should be doing this every year, regardless of COVID.
Yeah.
We should be recognizing and honoring our young residents as well.
And may they replace us.
Yes. Okay.
So upcoming meetings?
Yeah, might as well do that. Upcoming meetings.
Kim, I'm just looking at the administrator's report.
Yeah. I didn't print it because there was only one thing on it, but is there any problem looking at that? That's next week on the 2nd,
Looks good.
7 o'clock. Okay.
Actually, the report that I'm seeing only has one entry for June 9th.
Oh, and so skipping the 2nd? Well, I don't see why we wouldn't. I mean, honestly, that's right. We only had it on 9th. We could, the local emergency planning group continues to meet. However, with the opening and the things sort of phasing through and a little differently, I think unless there were some cataclysm, I do think we could skip the 2nd and go back to our meeting, our 2nd and 4th meetings week meeting schedule. And then, schedule something, emergency meetings if something drastic came up. What do you guys think about that?
I would think that since we're going back on the 1st, something may come up that, we need to weigh in on. So I would recommend posting it, but we can cancel it if we need to.
That's another possibility.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay. All right. Why don't we do that? All right.
I just don't want things to, be held up
Yeah.
because we're not meeting until the 9th.
Statewide, a lot of things are going to happen on the 1st.
That's true.
Right.
Okay. All right. Let's do that. We're going to pencil one in for the 2nd, but not run it if we don't need it. And we're going to be shooting more for the 9th. And we have a couple of things already. I think Deer Committee wanted to come on the 9th. And then Deer Committee, speaking of which, how did we want to handle it this meeting? Is this going to be, do we want it as a hearing with people able to, where we are hearing all the information from all the public, as well as the stewards, land stewards and ComScom? What is your, because I don't want to do this twice personally.
Yeah, well, I was actually just going to say that. I mean, the main purpose of this is really to hear from CONSCOM and LSC, right?
I agree.
But we definitely, we should have, I mean, this is my personal opinion, we should have public input. But yeah, maybe, we had discussed kind of limiting it to, 3 minutes or a couple of minutes to make a statement. And then, kind of similar to what Wayne does at town meeting, if, we can kind of gauge what the consensus is, right? But if unless somebody has something new to say, they can just kind of say, here sort of thing. And we don't need, 15 people saying the same thing.
So
but
we could
but
allow.
but I think we needed to end up being a hearing, right? I think that would technically.
Well, yeah, I think we need it. We need to say that it's a hearing so that people understand that they are, more or less invited to give input. But I think we should also maybe, if possibly even on the agenda, maybe we could say there will be, a strict. And I think 3 minutes is long, personally.
Yeah. I don't. It's up to you. Whatever.
I don't know. I'll think about it. But and then I think we should give only a certain amount of time. And if the last person, we can. There's only one more person to speak after the 30 minutes or 45 minutes or whatever we decide to allot to that. We could decide to let that person speak. But if there's 50 more people, I just don't want it to take all night.
Yeah.
So, anybody have any suggestions?
Yeah, my bias is to have people put it in writing. If they have data to present, cogent articles to make, arguments to make, they have facts to present, that can be done in writing. We've heard the I think kind of things over and over again. I think with the time now, since we have to make this decision, it needs to be based on facts. And so I would prefer, rather than having a public hearing, I would prefer to solicit comments in writing with data and leave it at that.
I'm perfectly fine with that, but I want to make sure the rest of the board is, because I do not want anybody to feel at the end that they're uncomfortable with the process.
I guess I would say I totally get what you're saying, Alan, but I think that it's just so weird now since it's all via Zoom. And so other people won't be able to see what was submitted in writing in this public forum that we have. So I certainly encourage anybody who wants to submit all of their data in writing. I completely agree with that. But I think also allowing 3 minutes for somebody to perhaps summarize what they have submitted in writing so that they can get it across to other people who are listening to the Zoom, non-Board of Selectmen members. And I think absolutely restrict it to, if it was restricted to 30 minutes, then 10 people would have the opportunity to get up and talk.
Okay.
Okay,
Also encourage an opportunity for time for people to speak.
so in the agenda, I will say 30 minutes of public input, 3 minutes per person, so that people
Capped at
know.
30 minutes, but capped at 30 minutes.
Capped at 30 minutes. I agree. Okay,
And is that going to include CONSCOM and land stewardship?
no,
Yeah.
that's
Okay.
for the public input. CONSCOM and land stewardship, we have not yet heard from.
Right.
But I also do hope that they do give us things in writing so that we have time to consider it before we get to our meeting. That's always much more effective for us, is if we get in fact, we've had in the past a policy that written materials needed to be submitted to us on the Thursday before our Tuesday meeting so that we had time to read it, consider it, and come prepared to our meetings rather than be blasted by all this stuff. And we're kind of caught flat-footed because we don't have a time to digest this.
Yeah.
So in the,
I can tell you that both the LSC and CONSCOM are preparing, and I think we'll be ready to submit something by Thursday.
okay, and if they're not, we should maybe put it off again until they are ready.
Just going back for a sec, I do also agree with whoever said that 3 minutes is kind of a long time. So maybe we could say maximum of 3 minutes with the idea of, encouraging people to be.
Yes, yeah. So Tim and I will work on that on the wording on the agenda, right?
Great.
Okay. Good, because I do think it's important to put it out there in the agenda so the rules are understood beforehand, so it doesn't look like we're being capricious at the end.
Yep.
So I do see school, I thought I saw her, Lori Hunter and Jared Stanton.
Yes,
On
they're
the
on the
line?
call.
Oh, no,
Yes.
Jared is still
Connecting.
connecting.
I saw Superintendent Hunter a moment ago.
Yep,
I
she's
know
there.
she's there.
I'm
There
here.
she is. But
Thought Jared was here.
he is, and
Oh, there he
there he
is.
is, right next to you in my place. I always wonder, if you guys are seeing these in the same order that I'm seeing them in.
Nope.
Okay. So welcome, and thank you
Thank
for
you.
coming to our meeting. So I will hand it over to you for a discussion of the alternative assessment methodology.
Great. So I'm just going to offer a little context and then Jared will give you more information and more details. All of this is about the 1/12 budget process, which is where we're headed here for the regional budget, because Concord's town meeting is now going to be in September. And I know you folks are still talking. So we just need to submit an application to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. Unlike the municipalities, the regional districts have to submit through DESE. So our application is due to the commissioner June 1st. So we're grateful you could talk with us tonight. And Jared will just talk through the details and some of the explanation of what we want to be sure is part of this process and makes sense to you and you can be supportive, because we do need, Jared, we need official votes of both boards, right?
A vote or a letter of support.
Okay, so why don't I turn it over to you and you can explain all of that.
Sure. Hey, everybody. So Desi actually just sent it out today. So we just got the form that we need to fill out for the 1/12 budget. So I sent a memo out last week and I'll just quickly go over it. So what we have to do as a region, if we're anticipating not having a regional budget before July 1st, we need to apply to the Commissioner of Education for a 1/12 budget, and he sets that. Now, what they, 99% of the time, they set 1/12 of your FY20 budget, or whatever current budget you are in, and the assessments would be pretty much the same on a, we right now get them on a monthly basis, so they would be assessed monthly. What we need is pretty much the application is very simple. We let them know the statuses of the town meetings. We give them the FY20 budget. We give them the FY21 school committee voted, and a few other things. But the one thing that we do need that involves the select boards from each town is what they call a letter of, I just said it, geez, it's been a long day. Just a letter that you would agree to the alternative assessment method that is in our regional agreement that was from 1957. If they do not have that, what the commissioner does is he will do the statutory method. But at the end of the day, when the budgets from both towns are passed, if there's any swing one way or the other, it would be straightened by, we would have to go back to the regional agreement, which is the alternative method. So it's as basic as, I think, a vote and then maybe an email or a letter of support that we need from you all, as well as the town of Concord. I'm happy to answer any questions on any of it, or how, really the 1/12 budget works, if you have any questions on that.
Jared, can you just do a high level version of the alternate method versus the statutory method, just so they understand the differences?
Sure. So the way that we do our assessments is we take all of our expenses and then we take out transportation and we assess that, and we take out the debt and we reassess that. The way that and it's hard to explain, but the way that the statutory method works is the first thing that they do is they take the minimum local contribution from each town. And that, and the dealt, so that say you owed $1 and Concord owed $2, what they would do is they would then, after you assess the minimum local contribution, everything after that is split by the enrollment. The way that we do it is basically everything is assessed by enrollment. So it swings every year. So statutory method, there's a swing in minimum local contribution. When I was working in Groton and Dunstable, it's a similar two-town region. There were years that Dunstable's minimum local contribution either went significantly up or it went down. And therefore, sometimes that even put them in override territory. So the minimum local contribution is just, it's just a different way that they do it, and it will swing one way or the other. In your case, not too much. I don't really have that number for you. But again, at the end of the day, based on the regional agreement, if the governor sets the budget at using the statutory method, once the budget is agreed upon, it would go back to the alternative assessment, and you would be reassessed those amounts.
The method we're using and the agreement that, as we mentioned, hasn't been modified since the 50s is about as straightforward as possible. And that's a good thing in many ways, because it's a straight percentage based on the enrollment shift on October 1st of that year. where the statutory method factors in some of the other formulaic accounting, which is the minimum contribution that comes out of the state legislation. And most districts have gone more to that, but because our agreement hasn't been looked at in so long, and the committee last year agreed not to open the regional agreement for a lot of reasons. And so it's about as straightforward as a formula as you could possibly have. It's literally per capita enrollment based on the two towns' number of students at the high school. So Jared, you just need a letter saying you're in support of the alternate method because it's in the regional agreement for 50 years and we're all set.
Okay.
Correct.
Would you like me to make a motion?
Is somebody going to make a motion?
I can make a motion if you'd like me to.
You? Yes, I'd love before you too.
Okay. I move that the Board of Selectmen of the Carlisle Board of Selectmen, in order to establish a 1/12 budget for July 1st, support the continued use of the established assessment methodology that's described in our regional agreement that was established in 1957.
Second.
Any further discussion?
I see we have the chairman of the finance committee on the call. Is there any advice from Victor?
I'm not sure he's really there. I don't see his, oh, there he is.
Sorry. No advice. I just joined Alan. I actually didn't catch any of the conversation.
Okay, thank you. Anybody, any other finance committee member? Hearing none? I
Okay.
guess not.
I mean, to me, this makes the most sense because what it means is that, you know, our calculation is based upon what we already have. Nothing is changing.
Right. And I would say bookkeeping sounds like it would be a little more streamlined as well, because you'd have to go back afterwards and, you know, rejigger everything. So I just don't think that's a useful, necessary thing to do, or a necessary thing to do. So, okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Jared, did you want to add something, or?
I was just going to say, just so the assessments won't be to the penny, because the commissioner will adjust for state aid, whatnot. So it won't be the exact assessment for FY20, but it'll be very close.
It's, yeah, okay. All right, this is a roll call vote because it's all virtual.
Arnold, I.
Oskalilowai?
Brown eye.
Lewis, I.
Reed, aye. So we have our motion, and Tim, can you draft up a letter just saying that the board at their meeting of May 26th voted to support the alternative assessment methodology?
Yes, I'll do that.
Send that over to Jared. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Yep.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you,
Take care,
you
guys.
too.
Take the rest of the night off.
Right.
Yeah, you can have it, yeah.
Oh, Lori,
We came right from school committee, so we're gonna go get dinner or
Right.
something.
So one thing- before you leave, Lori and Jared, earlier today, I don't know, Kate, if you want to let them know our proclamation.
Oh, that's true. Well, go ahead.
Earlier today, we made a proclamation making May 30th class of 2020 day in Carlisle.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. I'll pass that
Yeah.
along. That's great.
Actually, I'm sorry, but I think, wasn't the high school one in June? Wait a sec.
June 30.
June 30th?
June
Oh, no.
18th. June 18th, 2020.
That was Carlisle. Wasn't it?
Sorry, you're right. May 30th. You're right.
Yep, May 30.
Oh, perfect.
My bad.
Yeah, May 30th would have been graduation, so that's probably what you
Yep.
think.
Yes,
That's
that-
great.
yes.
Thank
It
you.
is May 30th. It
I'll
is
pass
May
that on.
30th. True.
Yeah, okay.
All righty. Thank you very
Sorry.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a
Good
great
night.
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 The sun's in my eyes. I'm gonna have to. Okay. Okay. So we're at our 8 o'clock. To finalize the town meeting warrant and set in the time and date. And I think we're just going to launch right into it because we have a lot of discussion, and people who wanted to hear about this will have to catch the tail end of it, I guess.
Now, I know Wayne was on the call earlier. Is he?
He's
uh,
on.
He's still there. Yep.
Yeah,
Okay,
he's there.
great.
He's right below you on my screen.
He's right below you on my screen.
Okay, there you go. So, and we also have many members of the FinCom here. Does the FinCom need to open their meeting?
We do not. They're just attending the meeting. Any conversation I'll represent essentially the sense of the committee from our last meeting.
Okay, so I wanted to give you that opportunity if you had to. So we just heard, of course, also from Lori Hunter that Concord is going to have their town meeting in September. So that's a new piece of information that we didn't have before. Last time we had talked, and when Victor was at the meeting, I thought it was going to be somewhere in July. They certainly hadn't, but apparently they've chosen a date in September. So that's quite far out. And I don't know if we want to, if we care about that or not.
I think the one question I had, which came up at the end of our last meeting, and I think, Tim, you were going to ask town council about it, was, I think, Victor, you're the one that asked the question, are there ramifications for us having a town meeting in June or in May, in June? Are there ramifications of our having that and not approving an operating budget?
Go ahead, Vic.
I'll let Victor
Correct.
go ahead on that one.
Yeah, I can speak to you that. So Kim had followed up on that. She can certainly correct anything that I don't have correct in the statement. But she contacted us before our last FinCom meeting, and it made a note that if we have a town meeting, we need to pass a budget. They will not allow us to have a 1/12 budget if we have a town meeting. And Kim, certainly add any color commentary that you have to the basic statement.
And it wasn't a may or can, it was you must adopt a budget. So the only way you can do a 1/12 is if you do not have a town meeting. Otherwise, you must adopt a budget.
Yeah.
Or you can't
And
spend
that's
any.
where I had made a note that, what you guys had, what the Board of Selectmen had voted on was in the middle, right? To have a town meeting without a budget. And so I think that is one thing that we probably need to have a brief discussion on. FinCom did have a discussion last Thursday on that.
Okay. Did you, but FinCom had a discussion about the budget, and having a budget and not having a budget. Is that correct?
We had a discussion. I mean, that's a done deal, right? If we have a town meeting, we need to approve a budget.
Right.
Otherwise, we'll not be able to pay the bills in July.
Yeah.
So our conversation on Thursday was, one, is that given the new pieces of information and our further discussion, has our position changed around our recommendation around postponing town meeting? And then as well as a beginning of a discussion that if we were to have to submit a budget, what that might be. But that will be completed this coming Thursday and maybe one more meeting after that.
And so how does the regional school district come into play on this, right? Because we approved that
Yep.
operating budget as well, but we've just
That's
approved
right.
going 1/12.
That's right. So the way it works is that we have to include the regional school budget in our budget, because if we do not, we will not have appropriated what we need to pay for their 1/12. So essentially, the regional school has gone through a 1/12, so it does complicate things a little bit. So we have to submit a full budget, including the regional school, given the fact that we have to obviously make the payments around their 1/12. In that, there are certain considerations, since we will have approved a number for the regional school committee. There's different scenarios. If Concord comes back and approves a budget that's lower than ours or higher than ours, there's certain things that will have to happen on our side. The other comment that I would make, and I think Wayne brought this up, Concord can plan to have a September town meeting, which it was always in the conversation. When I first caught wind of it before last Thursday's meeting, they had guaranteed that they were going to postpone it till July and potentially later. So they were in kind of thinking through it. But one of the things that Wayne brought up, I think it was Wayne, is that this postponement really is based upon the state of emergency. Once the governor lifts that, essentially, I think the towns have, I think it's 30 days to
30 days.
actually have that town meeting. So they can say September, but if something's lifted before that, they're going to have a town meeting within 30 days.
So with the argument being there's so many things that we would need to learn, which is why we were pushing out selecting the budget. Does that argument still hold if we only have 30 days to come up with a budget and schedule a town meeting? What will we learn in that 30 days?
Yep. So it depends on when the governor lifts the state of emergency. If he does not lift the state of emergency until September, then essentially the Concord town meeting is fine. And they will have learned a lot between now and then. And I can go through a bit about that this evening in terms of some of the conversations that we've had at the FinCom last Thursday. But that it's a more of a risk for them, and it's a risk for us too, in a certain sense, that if they have to call a town meeting because the state of emergency is lifted and they approve a budget that is higher than ours for the regional school committee, we will then now have to call a town meeting to be able to re-review that within that 30-day window as well.
And Victor, you said that you all had discussed whether or not your recommendation about holding a town meeting had changed or not, and what was the conclusion of your conversation?
Yep. So I'll first preface it by, this is FinCom's position from a financial perspective. I think the last meeting I made mention is that there are other considerations that obviously from a Board of Selectmen perspective you need to take into account. One, for example, the comment that I just made is getting that coordination with Concord because of the aspect of the regional school committee, regional school budget needing to be kind of approved close together to each other. But from a FinCom perspective, we continue to maintain our position that from a financial budget perspective, and I can go in more detail, the different pieces to this that will help elucidate our conversation. We continue to maintain that from a financial perspective, it makes more sense to postpone it. I think previously, one of the key aspects that we highlighted last time was around financial uncertainty. The other aspect that we actually also discussed was the notion around essentially the individuals coming to town meeting need to be represented, represent essentially the general population. And given the fact that we're still in phase 1, potentially might be in phase 2 by the time you have town meeting, I think many of the seniors will still be in this aspect of potentially in the what they call stay-at-home mode. As you know, phase 1 right now is safer at home, but for those who are elderly or who have essentially health conditions, it's still a stay-at-home directive for them in phase 1. Phase 2, it changes, but that might be a week before. And I think one of the things that we discussed is, one is, are there individuals who would want to be part of that vote or who should be part of the vote? Actually, we think they should be part of that vote that would come out or feel comfortable coming out, as well as I think the other aspect around, like the quorum. There's a potential that I think in legislation that you can reduce the quorum. Under a reduced quorum, I think that further kind of hones down essentially the individuals who would be represented in that if we were to go down that route. But I can go in more detail in terms of the different pieces that we kind of talked about. But in general, that was the build on the previous week's conversation that we had with you, which was based more on uncertainty. I think our other conversation is when you're trying to make financial decisions, making them all together including your warrants as well as the budget, as well as making sure it's representative in terms of the Carlisle town, were the two additional pieces of detail that we had discussed last Thursday.
I know that one of the selectmen's issues that we really wanted to take care of was Article 15, the extension of tax exemptions to seniors. And I'm just wondering if we didn't have our annual town meeting right now in June and we had it, let's say, in September, if we could rewrite the warrant so it would be retroactive for whatever, quarters we wanted, or, I mean, it wouldn't be like we weren't going to ever do it, but we wouldn't do it, let's say in June, we do it in September. But I'm just wondering if we could write it so it'd be retroactive in case we only did it in September for the tax bill preceding.
I don't know that it necessarily means that you have to make it retroactive to July 1. I'll have to read the reading on it. It really wouldn't come into play until they actually filed, if you're going to extend it, filed for their exemptions, which isn't until the actual tax bill goes out. So I think as long as you voted that prior to your actual tax bill going out, which is probably going to be closer to the spring of next year, I don't think that would be an issue.
I see, because it's done, it's an annual thing and it's not for each quarter.
You don't, right, no, it's not for you
Okay.
don't file for any exemptions and, abatements or anything like that until the actual tax bill goes out.
All right.
So
Okay.
right now it would be January 1, and if we end up with 3 preliminary things, it would be after that. So I
All
think as long as you voted that prior to us sending an actual tax bill to give that the exemption, there are no exemptions to be filed with
Okay.
the August 1 bill.
So that relieves the urgency that I was thinking, because I was thinking you would do it every quarter, or you could do it in the quarter. Okay. So that answers that. Any other questions from the selectmen? Comments about what we're doing here?
Well, there are also some other warrant articles that I think are significant. One is about the social worker position, and then the other is complete streets. I don't have I don't have it right here in front of me, the whole list of the warrant articles, but those are two that just come to the top of my mind.
Do we know if the community chest grant came through for the social worker?
My understanding is I think they got the community chest amount. I think was brought up at a department head meeting that they got awarded community chest money, but didn't know the amount.
Yeah,
That
so
was
we don't know if the
basic
social worker was included in that or not.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that we don't know that yet.
Yep.
Because that was what we knew already last week.
Right.
And this week we were supposed to find out, and we forgot to ask, I guess, at the LAPC. Okay.
Now, from those, just a couple comments around that. From the social worker perspective, if they had the community, it's probably more of a question, got the community chest, and you were to have like an August or September town meeting, they would not lose the community chest piece, community chest contribution if we were to have taken that up. All they would lose is about a month or two of social work, of doing the interview process or getting essentially the right social worker in place and having them start work. Is that correct? Or is there a concern around if we do not have the decision until a later meeting that they would lose the community chest grant?
I think the former rather than the latter.
Okay, so that's that one.
Yep, and the complete streets, I think that was one of the things that actually was kind of material to our conversation at FinCom last Thursday. Because I think from our perspective, we do need to look at essentially the budgetary impact of everything together. I think looking at complete streets, we might look at the amount as, hey, 150,000, 200,000 in addition to any budget. However, I think there's a few things that we had discussed that I think aren't really called out really in great detail in our previous conversations. They were kind of implied. But if you remember, we actually went through recent budget sessions with the departments around a exercise of a 5% decrease. And I think what we found in that, and I don't think we actually discussed this in our last meeting. Last meeting we spent most of the time, kind of discussing whether we should have a town meeting or not. But there's a few things that came out in that as observations. One is, if you actually look at what the departments or the committees brought up, the most significant reductions were actually through either capital or maintenance deferment. You could take examples, and all of it's information that we can forward to you in terms of questionnaires: police, fire, conscom, MFC, anything in those groups. Not to say that they didn't have other reductions, but those are the big chunks there. And significant reductions through capital or maintenance deferral is not really a reduction because ultimately that will catch up with you. And as you remember, FinCom and I think most people in the state actually believe that this is not a one-year challenge that we have from a budgetary perspective. It's going to be 2 or 3 years. So this whole aspect of realizing reductions through capital maintenance deferment over 3 years, I think you're putting obviously a little bit of risk, probably more than a little bit of risk for yourself, because ultimately at the very end of it, you're going to have to do a big catch up. I think second is that reductions in some departments would reduce state funding and certification. That was Board of Health and Library. And the last one was probably the most significant one around making sure that we consider the entire budget together. Because the other reductions were essentially losses, wages, and hours. That was Board of Health, which if we were to have applied a reduction to them, they wouldn't actually be able to go to the scenario that they had provided in terms of combining two roles. Library would be in that planning board. And I think that last one was one that, when we look at something that I'll place a statement, and this came from one of the FinCom members, and I'm paraphrasing it, is would we recommend going forward with complete streets if it meant people lost hours or wages or maybe jobs in that? Maybe, maybe not. But if we actually consider complete streets in June and not the full look at the reductions that we would actually look at, which we need more information on, and that really is from the schools that we think we'll have in August. You could make a $150,000 decision right now in a June town meeting, but ultimately that may mean you need to reduce more hours in other places in order to get to the reductions you need to. So I think having more clarity and waiting is even more important when it comes down to where the reductions are being surfaced up from the standpoint of the different departments. So I'll just pause there. That was one thing that we had discussed at the FinCom, and we take that in a very sober fashion. Whenever you reduce hours and reduce jobs per se, I think that's one thing that we want to make sure that we have as much information as we can when we make those decisions, including complete streets. I mean, it's looking at it as an entire prioritization and portfolio, perspective.
So maybe we should turn to Tim at this point, because he sent us an email and a little budget thing. And so Tim, would you talk about complete streets and the extension of the grant, possible extension of the grant, and whatever this budget and sources of funds memo is?
Sure, I'd be glad to. I reached out to the Complete Streets program last week to find out about the possibility of an additional contract extension. We did, as you remember, we extended the agreement from this June 30th to December 31st already. And I was told that it's very likely that they would approve another such extension. However, they wouldn't recommend making that request until November, much later in the year. But indeed, it's very likely that the state would extend the time period for funds already awarded. No promises about future programs, but these funds essentially were already awarded. Having said that, that likely means you'd rebid the project. We feel like we've got a really good bid in hand. It was about 100,000 less than the two other bids that we received. So there'd be the lost opportunity, we think, of that. The project would likely be more costly if an extension were made and we were to do it at some future point. The information that I forwarded to you today, the Complete Streets Committee, and largely David Friedman and Luke and Chief Fisher took another look at the project. As you know, the ask for town meeting was $150,000. By reducing the contingency from 10 to 5% and making some adjustments for a few other elements in the budget, it's reasonable to assume that the project could be, or the request could be lowered to $125,000 at this town meeting. So it, we did take another look at the project. That was a request that the board made last week. And so it was revised and pencil sharpened a bit. It could be reduced to that amount. I think the committee still feels strongly that the time to do the project is certainly this summer. We've got a good bid in hand. We've got a quality contractor lined up. Certainly there are budget considerations, but if the decision is made not to have a June town meeting, then we're really, we lose the opportunity to do this project this summer. And I'd also point out that if the decision is to have a June town meeting, you really need to make that decision tonight. We've got to finalize a warrant and move forward. And I know the moderator's on the call, and his working group, his advisory committee has some recommendations for the where and when, the time of that June town meeting, if that is the decision. But that's really the document that you have on Complete Streets was an attempt to take a harder look at the request being made. And the other information was that it's a possibility to get another extension, not a guarantee, but very, very likely, they said. It would just be, I guess, also a measure of how much support there was for the project. I mean, I think we'd hate to be sitting here 6 months or a year from now and finding out that we got another extension, but we didn't really want to go forward at that time either. So I think before we sought another extension, there'd have to be pretty strong support that this is a project that the town and the selectmen and the finance committee want to get behind.
Right, so if I could just kind of summarize it, it's 8 o'clock. This is when this topic was starting. So what we've learned tonight is that we can't have a town meeting without an operating budget and still expect to go 1/12, right? So we have to put in an operating budget. And Victor, what I'm hearing is FinCom doesn't want to put together an operating budget. Your choice would be to not put together, a recommendation would be not to put together an operating budget for a June town meeting and to wait to see what happens. And
Yeah, I think there's a couple of, why don't you finish your thought, and then I'll add to that.
well, I was just going to say, and Tim, what you're saying is that for Complete Streets, you think that that grant will probably, we'd be able to get an extension for it if we voted for this at a future town meeting, but that obviously would mean it was next summer, not this summer. And quite possibly it could mean that it's, from the data we have now, quite possibly it could be considerably more expensive.
That's correct. I think it's very likely we'd have to rebid it. In fact, I think it's certain we'd have to rebid the project.
Right. So the only possible thing there is that the economy is such that, these types of things do cost less, but that's a wild gamble.
Right. And I note that David Friedman just joined the call. David actually prepared the spreadsheet, so he may wish to speak to certain aspects of it if there are questions.
People have questions for David?
He's muted.
Yeah, before you do that, Victor, I have a question for you. So if we were to vote to have a town meeting and therefore we need to have a budget, are you saying that we could not just put, or let me ask a different way, could we put forward a 1/12 budget based on this year, on this fiscal year? Are we allowed to do that? Or you're saying you would feel that we ought to actually put forward a real 2021 operating budget?
Yep. So I think there's a couple of things that I'll highlight there. First, if we put forward a budget, and this is again one kind of comment and one of our concerns. If we put forward a budget in this town meeting, that's at 1/12, right, or whatever it ends up being. I think one of the things we actually discussed, and I don't know if we had Kim, whether you had a chance to check on this or not, but if the situation happened that we had the town meeting and we were unable to pass a budget, and I don't think we've had that situation before, but I'll comment on why we think there's a higher risk in this situation than others. Then I think we'd be in a bit of a quandary, because based upon our understanding is that we wouldn't be able to do 1/12 and you wouldn't have approved budget, and then July 1st you'd be in a bit of a sticky situation. We were going to follow up with that, just to check on that. I think the reason why we felt there's a greater risk in this is that a 1/12 budget essentially means some things won't be funded at the outset. So people could, at the town meeting, I think people could attempt at amending it or not amending it. And I think that ends up being, especially in the case of a budget that's reduction of what was the ask or the guidelines, could be problematic in terms of getting it approved. So that's one risk that's there. I think from a 1/12 budget perspective, what we would actually recommend, and this is what we were discussing, and we'll finalize our discussion on Thursday, that if we actually submitted into this town meeting the FY20 budget, in all kind of practical respects, you have a 1/12, right? So practical respects, you have a 1/12 of what you did last year. There would need to be some management on the part of Tim, working with the departments to say, hey, we're using the FY20, keep the spending to roughly about a 12th or thereabouts. But we effectively institute a 1/12 spending by submitting a budget that's flat to FY20. This is a 2.5% reduction on the FY21 guideline, which is essentially what is a bit of our concern in terms of individuals at town meeting who have a particular interest in a line item or a department and what they had submitted and wanting to get it approved. They can actually bring it up for discussion at town meeting, and potentially we could end up in a loggerhead situation. The implications of a 1/12 is it would be no COLA, staffing changes such as additional hours, steps, etc. You could potentially do it, but you'd have to do it within the existing budget. And I think pretty much every department would be hard pressed to do that. And then contractual increases, for example, communications, I think and I don't know where they are in essentially the negotiations. If they have an increase, then it has to be absorbed through the reducing expenses elsewhere. So it is possible from a practical standpoint, but we feel that, and that would be our position if we were to have a town meeting. But we think that having it set that way would ensue enough discussion that potentially there is a higher risk of non-approval of a budget. Where if we postpone, the 1/12 is guaranteed, right? So you will go to 1/12. It will not be raised or on the floor or changed from the 112, which is actually what we would want to try to manage to. So I'm not sure, I said a lot there. I just want to make sure that I didn't lose anybody, but so why don't you ask questions on any of the comments that I just made?
Yeah, but the last comment you just made, if the state does the 1/12, then it's not actually just 1/12. They would add in funds for the contractual items, right?
If you would start at a minimum of 1/12, and then the regional school district assessment, any debt, any things over that. There's a form that's going to go up, which the selectmen would approve. And I haven't seen the detail on it. I'm not sure if it's up quite yet. And you'd list your expenditures that you're basically asking for approval to make these expenditures without a budget. So there's detail behind that.
Right.
So it
So
would include anything on months that you had larger, usually a debt payment, assessment, or if there was something to do with a contract that was already approved prior to.
So what really
Mhm.
concerns me about just kind of going into the 1/12, and it concerns me whether, we're doing it or the state's doing it. It sounds like the state should do it, but I think it's really a lot about communication to staff and what they're spending this 1/12 on, right?
That's,
Because
that's-
because if our operating budget is not approved, then that, to me means those positions are not approved, that were put into the budget, and that basically we're kind of stuck on last year's priorities. And so I think it's incumbent upon Tim and I don't know, FinCom and the Board of Selectmen, I think, to just be very, very clear as to, okay, we're going 1/12, which means these are what our priorities are. This is what you can be spending it on, because otherwise it could end up costing us a lot more, because they're spending the 1/12 on things that aren't our priorities, and then when we do the budget, now we have to add in our priorities, and we've already pre-spent a lot of money on things that aren't.
that's right.
Does that make sense?
That's right. I think, so that's one aspect of it. I think the other aspect of it is that we could recommend this kind of practical 1/12, but it could be amended at town meeting. We haven't had it historically, we haven't had that, but you remember there was one potential situation, I don't know if it was last year or the year before, where we had essentially regional housing was potentially going to introduce something on the floor to try to get essentially a staff in there for that particular town meeting. And in concept, if we would have a town meeting and we were to include a budget, that could happen. So we wouldn't have a 1/12, practically from that standpoint. Whereas if we didn't, then there's no question. We go, obviously minimum of 1/12 plus, these payments that we have to do for various pension or whatever retirement types of things from that perspective. And that was the other risk, is that, we could put a budget that's kind of like a 1/12. We could have Board of Selectmen, FinCom, and Tim work to manage that, but it could be amended at the town meeting so that it's not 1/12 anymore, going upwards, depending on what the interest is of individuals who attend, which goes back to the aspect of making sure that, the aspect of representative of the town, of essentially the town population, given that some more senior individuals still kind of at a stay-at-home order perspective.
I think too, Nathan, you operate with the way we are now is you're only paying for the essential things you need to operate your department. There's no, extras being put in there. And I think everybody's adhering to that quite well. Your salaries and what you need to run your department. It's needs, not wants, so to speak. And the minute that the budget's approved, the 1/12 terminates.
Yeah, and so I guess I just want to just be really clear that whether we do the 1/12, the town does the 1/12, or the state does the 1/12, we need to manage it very, very closely and just make it very clear that, all the things that were built into that budget are off the table now. The increased
That's right.
hours, the increased staff, all of that's off the table because, as Victor was saying before, we may need to be reevaluating that.
Mhm.
So it's not 1/12 business as usual. It's 1/12 very, very lean.
Mm-hmm.
It's getting
Mhm.
approval on a monthly basis of expenditures we need to continue running the town until we set a budget. That's really, how you should, view it. And if it's not, I mean, we're going to get approved an expenditure amount. So it has to be very careful that way as far as you can't just, have a big bill coming in.
Right. And as from what I heard you saying last time, Kim, the responsibility of building that budget is the Board of Selectmen's.
Correct.
Yeah.
Approving
know,
it, yes.
I understand the sort of trade-offs and the difficulty, and I really appreciate the FinCom, the thought and time you've put into this. I feel that the discussion about town meeting and who comes and what if we have a budget there and somebody wants to amend it. I still lean toward, I'd rather have us as a town make the decision to adopt a 1/12 budget. And I think that, in my 30 years of going to town meeting, for the most part, even if there may be specific individuals that are pushing for something particular, that usually, 99% of the time, I think the town has made really wise choices at town meeting. And I think,
Yeah.
as the Board of Selectmen, that we, need to, if we do have a town meeting and have the budget discussion and vote, that we need to play an active role, not just here it is, but a real leadership role in explaining why it is what it is, and that these are extraordinary times. And we are trying very hard to find a way to move forward. I think it's an important form of our local democracy. And then added to that, I think I understand completely what you're saying, Victor, about not wanting to, spend on one thing and then we determine down the road that that's not really a priority. But I think, given the circumstances, that I would want to see complete streets get a vote by a town meeting, as well as some of the other articles that are up that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, just one comment on the complete streets piece of it, and we did not take a position on it. However, I will note that given the fact that it's significant, I think that the greatest uncertainty that we have is really around the schools. And, I think what you said, Barney, is very true, is that we want the townspeople to make the decision. At the same token, I think we want them to make the decision with the appropriate information.
Yeah.
And the biggest piece that's missing is actually the schools. From the standpoint of how school will be delivered, what that will end up costing more or less, as well as the state funding. And if we look back, and there's some work that was done, if Jared's still on, essentially state funding for the high school was reduced by about 10% in the last recession. That was offset by, I believe, if I remember reading it correctly, by a federal fund that helped through that time. But again, from a state perspective, which is what we look at from our revenue perspective, it was about a 10% reduction. And that's a material amount that goes into the conversation around that. So I think we definitely agree that, you want to have the town make those decisions. At the same token, is having all the information to say, hey, if we don't have the funding and there isn't a federal kind of supplement to cover it, and something like that, we need to maintain that for the schools. And it means that, jobs will be reduced or whatnot. Is Complete Streets the best time for it? Don't know. And I think that's the place where a number of FinCom members at this point would not be in a position to recommend approval of the Complete Streets. Whereas given, because of this aspect of not being able to see what that implication would be in a couple of months, right? So I think that the sense from the FinCom is by August, the state will have released their budget. They're going to go on a 1/12 in July, but the sense is in August that they would have by then would have released their budget. We would see what type of support they would have for the schools, and obviously by August we would hope that the schools have a bit more clarity in terms of how schooling will work and whether it requires more staffing to do it or whatnot. So I think that's where, on Complete Streets, that's what you're going to find some of the FinCom members there. And we did not do a vote or a position vote, so I don't know for sure whether 100% of them will be like that, but at least two highlighted that they would not be in support of Complete Streets at this town meeting in terms of approval.
Yeah, at the last meeting, I obviously was arguing initially for postponement of town meeting for the reasons already stated, that we simply don't have good information at this point. No, certainly not the kind of information we'll have in a few months. And I modified that when we thought we might be able to have a town meeting without a budget. We now know that's not the case. So I guess I'm back to my original feeling, which is that we really should postpone town meeting until we have the kind of information that will allow us to make intelligent database decisions on what kind of budget we might look at, so we don't have to make draconian cuts later on in the year because we spent up front. And I think I'm quickly leaning toward that sort of thing, especially with the idea that the hope is that maybe Complete Streets, if we find out we're not going to have huge cuts, that Complete Streets might be able to be done later in the year. My own feeling is if we're going to be facing cuts, Complete Streets is. I certainly can't recommend it anyway. It's not, to me, a high priority item relative to many of the other things that we're not going to fund in this budget in any case. And so it's the kind of thing, I think we could use that $200,000 a lot better. So I'm quickly going back to, I guess I'm recommending that we postpone town meeting until the fall.
I see David Freeman's hand up. David?
Just a question, if you pass a budget and let's say it's the 1/12 budget, which seems to have a lot of advantages to it in June, it doesn't mean that you can't have a fall town meeting and adopt a budget once you have the school information, which you'd be doing anyway if you let the state set the 1/12, right?
Absolutely, David. And I think that was our prior discussion with Board of Selectmen, where we had that conversation. Different Board of Selectmen selectmen had different viewpoints in terms of that. I think the thing that we're highlighting here, though, is one, from the standpoint of looking at it from a complete perspective. I think this is what Alan was highlighting, is if we were to go forward with Complete Streets now and approve it, you've already approved a certain amount of funding that you now do not have control to be able to adjust on the back end. So essentially, if we find that we're going to have cuts of X, essentially Complete Streets already approved. Essentially, you're going to have deeper cuts within the departments in order to do that. And the question is, we haven't had the conversation as to whether that is the trade-off that we want to have. And that's why at least two of the FinCom members had said, at this point, their support is not of the Complete Streets in concept, but given the fact that they can't make the comparison or looking at what that implication would be in a few months when we have more information, their position, personal position at this point, we haven't taken a position as a committee, would be not to support it.
No, I understand that. I was just wanting to be clear that, because a lot of the concerns you expressed had to do with whether, individual departments or whatever are going to bring up items. And I think I agree with Barney that I think that if people understand you're going to have a fall town meeting where you're going to really have a thoughtful budget with information that you can't have now, I think everybody will understand that, now is not the time for the battle. And I think those concerns,
Yes.
Aren't,
Yep.
I understand why you're raising them, but I don't think that they're real. And therefore, the 1/12 budget adopted by the town, accomplishes a lot. It gets you your 2.5% cut. It's lean, and it does all those other things. And is no different from the state doing it. And when you tell people that as soon as you have the information and based on whatever's going on with the world and whatever, we schedule a fall town meeting, I think everybody will just accept that budget. I think complete streets is a separate issue. My question was more related to adopting a budget or not. I think it makes a lot more sense to adopt a 1/12 budget than to try to cadge together a budget in a week, because then I think you are opening yourself up to an awful lot of question and amendments and things. And so I see, I agree with Barney that I think adopting the 1/12 budget is the way to go. And, I think it'd be great if FinCom supported complete streets, but if they don't, I still think it's good to have out there for the town. And I think you might be surprised to find that the town supports it. And I think the amount of money we're talking about is not 200,000, it's 125,000. And, I understand that every dollar counts, but in the light of what we know about and have identified both from Chief Fisher and the state and a lot of stakeholders, we've got an unsafe situation for Carlisle's children. And we are, we know we're not ADA compliant. And I think, put it to the people and let them decide whether to go ahead. And, whoever on FinCom wants to make their case and Alan wants to make his case, that's fine. But
So let me
Yeah.
just,
Yeah,
just
so
follow
Nathan,
up on a previous question, if I could, Victor, and Kim. So earlier, we supported, going back to our allocation for the regional school committee, to our agreement in 1957, so that the state didn't kind of take over and say what it was going to be. So I think we're going 1/12 with the regional school district. How would our doing our own 1/12 budget impact that?
Yeah, so we had a conversation around that, and let me also comment to David that I agree. I think Nathan kind of brought up that this 1/12 is about management and communication, and obviously there's the effort that we need to do to make sure we communicate properly. That the 1/12 with the potential of modification when we have more information is something that we'll have to do. So definitely agree with that. And just also a clarification on the position on the complete streets. It's about having all the information in front of you to make the right decision, right? And I think that's really the piece that FinCom is bringing up. But to Nathan, to your question, we've talked about that a bit. And if the regional school goes to 1/12, our approval of our budget in FY20 had a regional budget that's higher than FY21. So if we go 1/12, I think it will marry up with essentially the regional school budget that we approved last year. And if they're going to 1/12, I think it will be consistent. I think that was the question you were asking, but if it wasn't, feel free to ask another one.
Nathan, you're muted.
If we go ahead and, my question was, if we go ahead and pass a 1/12 budget at a town meeting in June, you're saying if we did that, we would still be within whatever might come from the regional school committee?
Yes, because last year essentially if they're going to 1/12 of last year's budget, we had incorporated that in our FY20 budget. So if we go 1/12, we should be able to cover off on that expense.
Okay. And then just one other thing, just Victor, what are the things that we're worried that could happen to our budget? You've mentioned possibly, we might have to cut staff, or we might have to cut hours. what are the factors that are going to impact our budget that much? You know, what
Yep,
are the
so I
things
think
we talked about that we
Yep.
need to worry about?
Yep, I think the factor which we'll have a lot more clarity on is essentially the schools. I think more specifically, and I was talking to Kim about it this afternoon, I think it's the regional schools. Because in the last downturn, I think from a state perspective, the schools lost just north of 10% of their state funding combined. That would be Chapter 70, 71, as well as Circuit Breaker. Carlisle is primarily Chapter 70, and that was when it was hit the least. So CPS, I think Kim looked it up. I don't think we had a huge impact in the last financial downturn. The high school had about a 2% impact on the 70, but they had 40% in North, I think, if I remember correctly, for the other two buckets, which amounted to about almost $500,000. So you have a $500,000 bogey at the regional, and obviously we take part of that on our side. That's a bit about the uncertainty, as well as the cost of school. If they, depending on what the directive is towards the summer, as we see this releasing of the constraints, the different stages, I think they'll have a better idea in terms of whether school will require, and I got this more from the CPS discussion, whether they have to run shifts of kids coming in and out, which means a longer day for teachers, more staffing. I think they'll definitely have much more clarity in that. And I think that's the bogey. I think from a local receipt standpoint, we know that, not local receipts, sorry, state funding for Carlisle is about $1 million for CPS. It wasn't hit really hard. And even if it hit the 2% that the state, that the high school got hit in 2008, 2009, it's not a whole lot. So I think it's primarily the regional clarity around the region.
Well, it seems to me like the bigger thing there, because, what is it, 26% of 500,000? That would be our bit.
Yep.
Right. So I think it seems to me like the bigger thing there is what are the rules that they put in place that we have to staff for?
That's right. That's right. I think it's a combination. I always look at it as you can look at one or the other, which is the bigger one, but ultimately it's a combination of the two. Without the second one, maybe the first one's not as big of an issue, right?
I just want to be clear too, that everybody understands we're not necessarily adopting the 1/12 budget that we were doing with the state. The 1/12 budget is where we have no budget. We are requesting to have 1/12 of our budget be approved as a emergency expenditure because we have no budget. So we can operate it if we pass a budget, but it will be passing a whole operating budget on FY20. But it will be as a whole, and you're not restricted to 1/12 every month. I just want to make sure you and then it would have to be amended one way up or down in September.
Mm-hmm.
But that could become very, that if it was implemented so that it was truly 1/12 every month, that would be much more restrictive than what we would get if
Right, you can. It's just you will not be restricted to any one amount in that month. It would be working with Priscilla. You'd pay your bill. You wouldn't be submitting for any kind of approval. You would adopt the whole budget. You could work it that way. I just want to make sure it was clear it wasn't adopting the same 1/12 of, that's how we're going to calculate every month. We can base it that way and do some work on it, but you will be raising at that point the whole amount of the operating budget.
You have more flexibility.
I just want to make sure. It just get funny when we keep calling it, adopting a 1/12 budget. We're still adopting the whole budget. You can run it like a 1/12, but it's not what the 1/12 is with the state.
So how does that work, Kim? I mean, what is the format of that in the warrant article? Because what you're saying is basically, if we adopt a 1/12 budget, we're not really adopting a 1/12 budget. We're just adopting a flat budget over last year.
Yeah, you will have your operating budget, and what Victor's saying is you'll have your line items by your department, and you will have to do an operating budget, which pretty much my understanding, Victor, would be mirroring the FY20 is what your idea
That's
was.
right.
Yeah,
Right.
you're not doing just 1/12 to spend wherever. You're giving you're doing an operating budget.
And we would have to include COLA and
With the
stuff in
same.
that too, wouldn't we? If it's, the
You don't
state says
have
you
to.
don't, you don't have to?
You
Okay,
could do COLA in September. I'll be shot for that one, but you don't, no, you don't, you can, you
contractual
could-
things aren't, we can ignore those?
No, if you're gonna do your contractual, you should work, work that in. You're doing just like you were in the spring. You have to adopt an operating budget. Think of it that
Understand.
way.
Yep.
If we start to want to spend it on a more 1/12 basis and keep track of it, I would say you tell the departments to keep what they're doing now and just only buy the necessities, and we would pay the bills of debt and all that and not have to be looking at what are we spending this month or not. We can give you analysis, but you're in a sense approving the whole,
Understand. Yeah.
budget,
Right.
We're adopting a year-long budget.
year-long budget. So you
right.
want to, so we can make adjustments in September for, some of, those other things. That would be up to you, whether the council on aging or anything like that you wanted to include. But it could be amendable.
Why we would do that? I mean, it seems to me like we should either wait, or we should just go ahead and put together a new budget that's a stab of what we think it should be, but that reflects the priorities that we want for next year, and then plan in September or whatever to have another town meeting and adjust that budget.
Yeah, I think I can comment a little bit to that too. I think you could create a stab at it, and you're going to have certain reductions, and it's going to mean, I think this is one of the things that FinCom spoke about as well, is that if you do a reduced budget, let's just say you take a step in towards that, it will require essentially the departments to pivot, and if you come back and either revise it up or down in September when you have more information, then they're gonna have to pivot again. I mean, there's that aspect of, it's just a couple of months. Do you really want them to go through the gyrations of you doing a very imprecise budget right now, starting to make changes because you're reducing it, versus just waiting and have them make the change once we have more clarity in kind of the biggest swing factor that we're looking at. I think that was, to the point of trying to make it simple. We continue to have a budget that is similar to what you have previously. And I think I would actually use the term, and I have it here written on a piece of paper, it's like you're effectively you can effectively institute roughly a 1/12 spending with proper management directives. To Tim's point, this is not a 1/12 budget. You're approving essentially a budget amount that's the same as the previous year. You can, with proper management, effectively kind of have a 1/12 type of run rate, plus or minus. And the benefit of doing it this way, as opposed to making a guess at it, is that you create at least a little bit of runway. You're not making a change now and then changing it back up or down when, essentially you've reduced hours, increased hours, reduced hours, or have to reduce more hours. I think that's the piece we want to make sure we don't send the departments through.
But isn't that exactly what we're going to have to do?
That's what I was just going to ask, Alan. It seems like they're going to have to do two anyway.
Yeah. I mean, what we're doing is we're making a guess at what the future is going to look like without any information whatsoever to go on, instead of simply saying, look, let's make that decision when we have the information.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not necessarily going to have all the information.
We'll have a lot more than we do now.
We'll get a lot more.
I mean, we'll know about the schools. I'm not sure we'll know about,
State aid, you might have better idea of state aid.
Yeah.
yeah.
So, I mean, there's so many things we'd have to decide though, right? I mean, so
Right.
Are we doing COLA or are we not doing COLA?
Right.
We have the contractual obligations that, of increases. Are we factoring those in, or are we just saying it's just going to be flat and then each department decides whether or not they're going to do COLA or not?
No, they do COLA, but they take it out of their paper budget. You know what I'm saying? They're going to have to
A lot
find
of
that
paper.
2% somewhere else in their budget.
But that's, but what, like 90, 80, 85% of our budget is staff numbers, right?
Yep.
It is. It is. But I guess I'll go back to, but trying to balance our budget on the backs of our non-union employees and not giving them any COLA when everybody else is getting not only COLA, but they're getting steps. So that really bothers me no end.
Well, and that's where if the state does the budget, if we do the budget at the 1/12th at the state, then we can we can be funding those increases. And, right?
I wouldn't fund anything over and above.
You don't have
But
any-
you wouldn't.
If you don't have anything, you couldn't
Kim,
do a
Kim, I was
COLA.
saying
You
we
absolutely
can.
could not do a COLA because it's not voted. So
Right.
you
Yeah.
cannot do any contractual that wasn't pre-approved prior to the 1/12.
Right, so, and if,
You also can fix it in September
yeah,
Well,
and,
because you won't be at a deficit.
and your COLA can be retroactive. I mean,
Retroactive.
Yes,
Yeah,
it
exactly.
can.
Yeah,
That's, yes. I've been in towns where they did it as late as November one year and they did
yeah,
it
I mean,
retroactive.
it's,
Yes.
I
yeah,
mean,
You're not stuck. You could do it from that point forward, or you could say, okay, here we are. And, the other contractual ones got a step and a COLA, and you could in September vote your budget and you could do your COLA and you could have it retro to July 1. It's paperwork of calculating that out, but you can do that. So it's not like if you do the 1/12th, you've, lost out on the COLA, or they don't regroup it at some time if you chose to give it.
Assuming we have the money.
But yeah, right.
yeah, I mean, so that's kind of what we discussed last week, though, was we can do things retroactive. If, I mean, I think the 2020 budget is the best thing we have to go by. I understand the concept of waiting and trying to push some things off, and we will have a better understanding of the schools and that sort of thing. But also too, I don't know, and this isn't just a push for complete streets. I do think we should get complete streets voted on and then no. And I am concerned that if we wait, now what happens is everybody knows what the initial bid was, right? So things will adjust accordingly, and it's almost guaranteed it will go up. But if we, and I don't, I'm in the same camp as Barney. I don't really have a concern that that somebody's going to come to town meeting and try to change a line item, try to change. I mean, we did have that almost happen once, and through conversation, through the selectmen and other people, that were involved in the community doing their job and their due diligence, it didn't happen. And do I like the idea of approving a budget every month? No, but I do like the idea of doing something, and as Barney said, moving forward, right, and progressing, and maybe that some of these items get voted down. Some of the other things that where we're dependent upon state aid. As that varies, we will know maybe in September, but we may not. So that's the thing. We could just kind of keep kicking this down the road. But if we just approve a 1/12 based on what 2020 was, revisit in September, or even August, if we know more about the schools, then we can, get some of this stuff, off our plates, and adjust accordingly down the road. I mean, that second bite at the apple, I think, is nice. The being able to revise the budget in September, and then also too, it gives folks more time to think about what their priorities really are. Maybe with the tightened belt, they can say, oh, well, maybe we didn't really need to do this, or we don't need to do that. I agree completely that we can't defer the maintenance. And that's always the easy one for people to say, well, we just won't do it. But, to Victor's point, it needs to be done, right? And we pay now or we pay more later. I'm kind of in the same camp as Barney, that I think we should move forward.
Yeah. And I think that comment on just the deferred maintenance piece of it, what I was highlighting there is that those were where the most significant reductions are. If you take those away and say that you're going to really do the reductions, essentially it's going to be, in the spaces of lost wages and hours. I think the whole aspect of paper and whatnot, you look at, we've sat through these budgets you know, the paper and things, you're just tweaking around the edges. and
Fortnite.
such.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, that's why FinCom puts passwords on their meetings.
Yeah.
So this is instance where I've been through this. FinCom actually had something like that. I can't remember. It was back early in April, unfortunately.
Well, anyway, I think it's good that nobody reacted. I think they got, well, Tim obviously got rid of them, but I think
Yep.
this thing is to do nothing or say nothing. So there we go.
That's-
So I apologize. I lost track of what you were saying.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, what I was saying is just calling, essentially elaborating a little bit on what Luke was saying is that, you know, the observation that I had when I went through all of the notes again is, you know, most significant reductions were, you know, through these capital and deferment, but I'm trying to connect it, right? So what I'm connecting it to is like, if we were to really go back and go to the departments and say, well, you know, you got to go, you know, you can't depend on these. We have to get real reductions. It's going to be substantial from the standpoint of staffing and whatnot. Really rethinking how they do their work. Obviously, not something that we're going to be able to sift out in a week. Which again, there's this aspect of, you know, pushing that forward, which could be at another town meeting. But at the same token, I think what we're actually saying from a FinCom perspective is, if there are those types of deep cuts, you know, would somebody from the town look at that versus and complete streets and say, yes, complete streets is the right thing to do versus all of these other cuts? That's all we're saying, essentially, looking at the two together, and we'll have a better visibility in terms of that in August. At least that's what one of our individuals who works for the state is giving us kind of pseudo information on, not 100%, but he feels that by August, and actually he was actually pushing to have the town meeting at, you know, in August as opposed to September, we'll have more clarity in terms of that type of funding and whatnot. But in any case, I think it's looking at it together is what FinCom is trying to propose here.
I don't think you can vote complete streets in August. Basically, if you don't vote it now, you have to wait until next spring, because the work has to be done in the summer. It has to be rebid. It's a lengthy process. And so you wouldn't be voting it in August.
Right. Let me ask a simple question here, because I hear people arguing, okay, we're going to do the one, they're calling it a 1/12, but it isn't the 1/12 budget. We're going to adopt a budget that has a bottom line identical to the fiscal 20 budget. Is that correct?
Yep.
And all we have, but we still have to then go into the detail and figure out whose box gets gored in order to accomplish that.
No, it has all the details of the 2020 budget as well.
Okay, well, don't we, for instance, don't we have raises going in places that take effect July 1st that aren't in the 2020 budget, like the schools?
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Okay, where's that money come from?
That's right.
Yeah, and that means that the school has to do a budget, and they're not here right now tonight. And are they prepared to do a budget?
I'm here to speak for schools.
Oh, okay, David. Good.
So sorry, I had my hand raised for a while.
I'm sorry.
So I didn't feel like I wanted to interrupt. Let me get out of the kitchen. Okay, so I think, you know, I'm listening to this and I'm trying to follow it. But I would say a couple things. One is, just before I start, I want to reflect back on Victor's comment, because in 2008, I was the chair of FinCom. And while he's correct that the region had a bigger impact, we had a bigger share of the region at that point. And we were there in the Carlisle school side to keep the actual increase down. So even though, you know, we sort of prepared ourselves for the contingency, and we had a much lower increase. We might have been 0, as I recall, on the operating budget of the school during that time. And the Concord FinCom and SchoolCom, much to my chagrin, sitting in Victor's seat, did not exercise what I consider to be fiscal prudence, and they went ahead with, you know, 5% increases or whatever. So the net, the sort of delta impact of the region was higher than the CPS, but that was because of that particular set of things, in my opinion. Moving forward to now, I think that there's two issues I'd like people to be aware of in terms of the school budgeting. One is that we are in the middle of a contract. We're not negotiating. So we have COLAs and steps and lanes that are contractually obligated. Now, we are talking to the Carlisle Teachers Association about that, but they have the right to say this is in the contract. So we have effectively, I would say, out of the sort of 3% that was requested, about 2% of it at least, maybe 2.5% of it is contractual increases for the teachers, and maybe to a smaller extent for the non-teachers, but specifically for the teachers. The other thing that is very top of mind for us right now is if we understand the direction of where the budgeting exercise is going, we also have to notify teachers who we don't intend to rehire for next year. We have a deadline of June 15th. And, maybe Kim knows more about the origin of this, but I kind of just learned this today. I think that the language in many, teacher contracts say June 15th, and it may even be statutory, because they never considered that a town meeting would run longer than, say, the end of May. Like, you have to tell teachers by the 2 weeks after town meeting or something like that, whether you intend to hire them or not. And so in the era of June town meetings, we are still stuck with the obligation to make a call on whether we're going to rehire teachers or not rehire them. And so that's a now thing. And that's one of the things that I'd like to bring up, in a FinCom meeting, Victor, to kind of understand what we should do there, because we really have to give notification to these teachers about whether, we have to because if we end up, and we're not doing business as usual, if we end up making decisions on personnel and we're stuck with contractual increases and we still get our only 1/12 slice, then everything else has to get, part of normal, the normal process. But people should be aware that we are operating to a kind of a June 15th deadline at present. I'll revert.
When I was on school committee, of course, that was in the Pleistocene, we used to pink slip a bunch of teachers every year. Just on May 15th, the pink slips used to go out to, they were all the non-tenured at that point, just for that reason, because we almost always hired them all back, but
Right.
I don't know what they're doing and if they still do that.
There are a few towns, when somebody had talked about one town that does still practice that every year. They pink slip them and then they hire them back. So I guess you'd probably want to go on a conservative model and then do that. And then when you have more information.
We may have to do that. We will do if we have to. We just rather have some
Yeah.
guidance. But yeah, of course. Of
So
course.
I think we'll definitely we can have a conversation about that, David. But you brought up something that I might have to change my answer to Nathan's question earlier, because I think what you said, and I think it also applies to the regional as well, is that even though they're going to 1/12, they need to honor their contracts increases. Is that correct?
Well, they're in a much more interesting position. They're in a negotiation. So
Okay.
I want to be careful what I say in a public meeting, but they're in a negotiation now. The, core of the argument, I think, and you can appreciate, is kind of a corollary of what you guys are having, which is to say, union says, let's have a negotiation right now and let's lock in whatever we're going to lock in. And, the administration and school committee say, wait a minute, this is a high uncertainty period. Why would we do that? Why don't we just wait? Why don't we just, because there is a mechanism in negotiations, and some people on the Board of Selectmen know this very well, that if you just go beyond the termination of the contract, you effectively are kind of like the 1/12 scenario. You don't have a COLA. You honor generally typically steps and lanes, and you just continue kind of the continuation of the prior contract until such time as you negotiate a new one. So that's an ongoing debate at the moment. I certainly know where I stand on that situation, but that's a negotiation. So,
Okay.
so they have that extra variable. When I wrote you, I don't know, Victor, maybe 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago,
Mhm.
I kind of outlined that as one of the variables that, the
Yeah.
region faced,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So region's a little strange because region has its own pots of money. Region can unilaterally make a decision to overfund OPEB, how much free cash it'll return, how much it'll prepay. It has a lot more levers than Carlisle Schools. Carlisle Schools is more or less like any other town department, except that it has a very large fixed contract. It's in the middle of a very large fixed contract.
Yeah. Okay. So Nathan, back to your question earlier, I think pending what this negotiate comes out to, essentially what we were actually putting through in terms of the overall top line budget being the same as FY20. If obviously the regional school comes out with more, then I think it goes to Alan's point is that we're going to have to look at prioritization, across the different departments to actually support and fund those things.
Thank you, Victor.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I asked this before, but I don't remember the answer. Last week, we went through this whole discussion. We decided we're going to have the town meeting. We weren't going to put in the operating budget. If we have this town meeting and we do this operating budget, are there any negative impacts on anything like what we just did earlier with the school? Does that have any impact on our being able to do 1/12 with the regional school district if the town has adopted a budget?
No. No, because the other town hasn't adopted their budget, so.
Right.
Okay, we're certain.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think what will end up happening, again, going back to the scenarios, is we will have approved a regional school budget. If Concord comes back and when they have their town meeting, approves a budget that is higher than ours, then essentially we have to reconvene a town meeting to review and approve that or not approve that. If it comes in lower, then I think what the information we provide is we kind of push that back essentially in terms of a rate reduction or just a number of different options that we don't have to have another town meeting. But if they approve a budget that's higher than ours, that we approve in June, then we have to reconvene within a certain time period to review that.
So one of the other things we talked about last week was going ahead and applying to do the 1/12, just in case something happened where we couldn't have our town meeting. Have we done that? And what's our timeline for having to do that?
We have not yet, and I asked for a timeline of what the dead stop would be, and I haven't received an answer.
Okay, it seems to me like we really should do that.
Yes. Yeah,
Mhm.
because, we could be rained out. We could have some other thing happen.
Oh, yeah. You would not be able to spend on July 1 if you don't have a budget or the 1/12 approved.
That's the belt along with the suspenders, and I'm a big advocate of that.
So who owns making sure that that happens?
Selectmen.
Well, yeah, people will give us something, quote us.
Well, I
Well, I gotta ask the
I
question.
work
who-
with
who
Tim
owns
and Priscilla because it's starting with the minimum 1/12 and then figuring what other expenditures are over and above that. There's a form on Gateway that has to be filled out and then approved by the selectmen and certified by the clerk of the selectmen. And then submitted for approval.
I
That's
mean,
the
are we pretty certain that that deadline isn't Monday? Are we pretty certain that?
Oh,
deadline-
no, it's not Monday. You do it the month before for the next month. You don't have to do it June 1st.
So we don't have to do an over. Well, the month before
Every
for the
month
next
you
month
do
would be, the
June,
month
you do
before for the next
July.
month would be June 1st.
Excuse me?
The month before the month of the expenditure would be June 1st.
You have to in June apply for approval for a budget in July.
Right.
They don't have a date set on it unless Tim's heard something differently.
Mhm.
They don't, you wouldn't want to wait till the day of the town meeting the next day. I would say you'd probably do it in the first half of the month. And I would think if they have towns that have town meeting, they're going to give priority and work through the ones that have already pushed them off and are doing their 1/12 first. Because there are towns that are having town meetings within the first week or so of June. So towns were asking their DOR reps, what's our date that we have to have our budget in if we have a town meeting scheduled?
And we don't have that.
No. I'll get back on with Amy tomorrow.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we know, because when I asked who owned it, it wasn't you. You didn't say me. You said the board of selectmen. So-
I'll work with everybody on it, but no, it's a form that's downloaded
So
from
who
Gateway.
owns it?
That has to be signed by the selectmen. They have to, you're basically requesting emergency expenditure, deficit spending is what it is.
Yeah, but who does the numbers?
So Kim, let
The
me.
numbers, Priscilla and I and
Okay.
Tim will work on the
That's
numbers.
that's what we need to know. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
You can approve them or disapprove them. And I haven't looked at the full form. There'll be line expenses on it and you can put things on that you want and you can take things, off.
It seems to me like if, in our draft agenda for our penciled in meeting for next Tuesday, this should be on it.
It's fine.
Yeah, I agree.
And Priscilla and I have been talking. I think it was waiting to kind of, to figure if it was a done deal and not.
I just want to make sure we're
We'll have
not
to do
waiting
the
for you,
exercise
we're not waiting
anyway.
for us.
The form wasn't up the last meeting we had anyway, so I will check now to see if it's up.
So I would like to poll the board because we've been kind of chasing our tails a little bit here. We have two choices. We have no town meeting until September, for instance, and doing individual 1/12 monthly budgets until then. Or we could continue shooting for our 20th of June, let's say, just to put a date on it, with a flat fiscal 20 repeated budget and any other articles that we want to put on there. And that would also include a budget for both school systems, the CCHS and the CPS.
Yeah. So let me just make a quick comment there around, you don't need to approve the flat, budget. That's actually a recommendation that FinCom will bring about. So I think it is an aspect of, you have to include a budget. If you include it, FinCom will provide a recommendation. Our current thinking right now, and we'll have a final conversation in the next couple of meetings, one being Thursday, as to whether there's any tweaks to that or maybe tweaks down or tweaks up. But I think if you have a town meeting, FinCom will prepare and submit a budget, or you postpone the meeting. And I don't know where the September timeframe came in. I think there was some conversation at FinCom, maybe in August, after some of the information we have confidence that it's going to be in by then. But it's either a town meeting later or a town meeting in June, and then FinCom
Right.
will provide its recommendation.
Okay, so a town meeting, but with a budget is the point.
But don't we have to do the warrant tonight?
Well, if we're going to have a town meeting, yes, we do.
Yeah.
That's why I want to poll
Okay.
poll the Board of Selectmen so I know what we're doing. So I'll do it in alphabetical order just for simplicity's sake. Barney,
I am in favor of holding a town meeting in June.
Luke,
Yeah, I'm in favor of holding a town meeting in June as well.
Alan, oh, sorry, it's Nathan's next.
I want a third better option.
Thank you. I would too. If I had one, I would be giving it to you. honestly.
We thought we had one last week.
Yeah, exactly. We thought we really had it nailed.
That was an interesting thing, that hybrid. She's like, oh, wait a minute, I have nobody's
Yeah.
thought of that one yet.
Yeah, I
But
know. And
it
then I
was
fixed it
very
because
fast.
I gave it the woohoo too early.
And with the
Come back to me. I'm still thinking about it.
Okay.
coordinating with Priscilla, because she'll have to, a lot of the bills come through her, so we'll have to look at bills that were paid last year, and then the months forward, departments will have to give her a heads up of what they've got coming down the pipeline for it too.
Yeah. And I think we all have to still be cognizant of the fact that this new budget, which the FinCom will be proposing, will be, if there is the COLA in it and the steps for the schools and stuff, those departments will have to be readjusting their intern. They're getting really a bottom line. Let's not forget they're getting a bottom line. So they'll have to be readjusting their discretionary spending in order to accommodate those new expenses that they're going to be getting.
Well, and that's
We
precisely
haven't
what-
finished the poll though, right?
No, because Nathan asked for more time because he was still thinking. So
I said to keep going, but I mean, what you just said is exactly what makes me nervous, which is it's not just business as usual if we do this. It's not, but go ahead. I'm
okay,
sorry.
well, so a go ahead is then Alan.
Postpone.
Yeah, and I'm leaning towards postpone as well.
Oh, Nathan, here you go.
That'll teach you.
This may be the last big decision you make on the board.
Yeah, that's right.
Don't screw it up.
And Victor, the FinCom thinks that they can come up with a decent budget within the period of time that you would have?
Sorry, for which option?
Town meeting.
Or if we hold a town meeting, is there enough time to have a budget?
I mean, if it's a town meeting, we're starting with the base of FY 2020 and tweaking around the edges. So, we will have something, for town meeting.
And I presume that budget would be less than 2020?
It might be. I think we've talked about things like OPEB and other types of things, but I think we kind of convinced ourselves in the last meeting that we probably should include it in there. But like I said, you can use the base as FY 2020 is going to be the base recommendation, and we might tweak around the edges on that. I think there wasn't a whole lot of, how would I say it? There wasn't a whole lot of appetite to go above FY 2020.
And if we, I mean, when in the fall, we can redo the budget and it can be lower, right?
Yes, it can be lower than, so FY 2020, FY 2020 is about 2.5% lower than the guideline we put out in December. But it can be lower than that in the fall.
And Kate, you've got a chat question.
Oh, sorry. And there's a chat question, which is, what happens if the town votes the budget down? Well, I believe the answer, and Kim can.
Can't.
Well, we would still have the 1/12 budget in the wings, no?
No,
Because
if you have a town meeting, unless we go and there's no quorum, you don't have a town meeting, we go to 1/12. If you have a town meeting, I've been told by council, the DLS law, they've checked it out, you must adopt a budget. So we are there till we adopt a budget.
Oh, boy.
I don't know. I could ask her again what happens if you don't, but no, that was her wording. You must adopt a budget.
Town council's on the call as well.
Yeah. Tom, you're muted, so if you would like to unmute yourself and jump in here.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, so I appreciate what Kim's saying, and I read I think the same email from DOR that Wayne forwarded. I do take some exception with that email. I cannot imagine a situation where the town dutifully tries to adopt a budget and for whatever reason determines it can't go on and adopt a budget and has to postpone the meeting due to emergency concerns, and DOR is not going to allow you to adopt the 1/12 budget. It just, to me, it just doesn't make any sense.
No, I agree with that. You just couldn't go into the town meeting without any kind of budget to do it. They're the must. I agree with you. If we, the
But that's
town.
not, yeah, but Kim, that wasn't the question that was asked. The question was asked if the town voted the budget down, not if we went in without.
Right. If you voted it down, I agree with Tom that I mean, you'd have to go back to DOR and ask that question. And I can ask that of Amy to send it along unless Tom wants to.
Happy to.
I just hate playing pin the tail on the
Yeah,
dog.
let's get an answer on that. It doesn't hurt to ask.
Yeah.
It would be a pretty revolutionary act by town meeting.
It would, yeah, but stranger things have happened.
Actually, I don't think so.
Strange year.
All right, I think we should go forward with the town meeting.
Okay, so we have 3 forwards and 2 waits, so the forwards have it. And there you go, Victor. Yeah,
Very good. So we will take that to our meeting on Thursday, and we'll put our pencils, sharpen our pencils, and start with the FY20 budget, and come back with a recommendation.
Oh, I just want to react or at least recognize one of the things that the FinCom did talk about, and that was in terms of representation and at the town meeting. And what if by the time we have our town meeting, we are still for the elderly, the stay at home rather than the stay safe phase for them, and they don't feel for whatever reason that they can or should go to that town meeting? Do we adjust our stance around that?
You mean around having a town meeting?
Yes, because if a large part of the population feels that they're actually prohibited from going, or don't feel comfortable in going because not enough of the stay-at-home orders have been lifted by the time they were not in a suitable phase, do we continue?
Well, can we?
Yeah, and I'll make a note, Kate, here as well, because you and I were on the same call with Concord. That actually is the material concern for Concord in actually postponing their town meeting. I think we talked about uncertainty, but that was brought up a couple of times in the conversation around ensuring that they had that representative aspect of it, because that's the whole point of what Marnie's highlighting here.
And if we don't have a reduced quorum, we may not get a quorum if we rule out everybody over the age of 60.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. And it's actually the reduced quorum that we're also even more concerned about, in terms of the whole aspect of passing budgets, essentially actually adding things into the line items or whatnot as we kind of come through in that. But that hasn't been, I don't think that's been approved at the state level yet, the reduced quorum. But Wayne, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that.
That's correct. That legislation was just finally passed by the House this afternoon. And so now there's some differences with the Senate. So my understanding is it has to go back. It's now a ping pong with the Senate needs to consider the Houses, and then it goes back and forth. Though I saw one report saying that that still could happen fairly quickly and go forward as soon as be done by this week. I think the big pressure is that some of the representative towns have been barreling forward planning for virtual town meetings, which this legislation would allow. And for example, Lexington's is scheduled for June 1st. And so if this isn't passed, they're going to have a number of very unhappy constituents in much larger towns than Carlisle. So we'll see what happens.
So there was
yeah.
something we had talked about like many meetings ago, and I think that there was something in our packet or something that there's something that once we've decided on a date, we can't not do it.
It's possible to not do it. So what happens is that once you post the warrant, then and Tom and I have had a little bit of back and forth with this changing legislation, so I'm not sure what his latest view is, but I think once you post the warrant, at least the majority view around the state is that it's then up to me to make a call whether conditions are unsafe to hold the town meeting. Now, I hear the concerns that the FinCom and the Concord have expressed. The reality is that your advisory committee has, I said, look, our mission is not to figure out whether to have the town meeting or when, but if town meeting is going to happen, how should we do it? And so we went forward, and the committee recommends that if we do it, it should be on the plaza, outside, no tent, no canopy, just outside, and we can easily accommodate 200 or more people in the plaza space with social distancing of about 9 or 10 feet, assuming that some proportion, probably if it's a higher proportion, you can get more people in, but assuming that some proportion of people come as couples and who would not need to be that far apart from each other. And so there are a whole bunch of other towns throughout the state who are planning to go forward with town meetings, some of them outside with canopies, some of them inside in gymnasia, and a fair number will occur before June 23rd. So basically, you'd be asking me, if you adopt the warrant and then suddenly get cold feet, you'd be asking me to say, well, gee, even though we have it outside and we have all this space, that I think it's unsafe and I ought to call it off. And then, you would still be able to avail yourselves, I believe, of the 1/12 rule with the state. Personally, I can tell you that, in the absence of the health trends turning a whole lot different than they have been going, which is, of course, entirely possible. So I never say never. But if things continue to stay where the state is trending slowly downward and looking around the rest of the state, my personal opinion is that we can safely hold a town meeting on the plaza with 200 or more people around June 20th.
I would think that just the mosquito repellent being sprayed alone is going to enforce the 9.
Well, perhaps, but that's why the recommendation is 10 o'clock in the morning as opposed to 7 p.m. in the evening.
And what about the couples that don't want to be next to each other?
Well, yes, they don't have to. We won't force people.
Wayne, are you also still planning to, I thought I saw somewhere that you're still thinking you're going to do something at Benfield, or no?
No, our committee discussed that, and we're don't want to do that this time for two reasons. One is the logistics of what we need to do just to pull this off in the plaza are going to be challenging enough for myself, the clerk, and a whole lot more volunteers than we usually have, as well as the police and fire and EMTs and so forth. And the other reason is that they would then have their own set of social distancing and requirements down there.
Okay.
It's just too hard to manage.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so we will be having a town meeting unless somebody has changed their minds after this conversation. On the 20th, Saturday, the 20th, at 10 in the morning.
Yep.
Okay.
So just to be
Wayne, he doesn't
clear,
know it.
sorry, yeah, no, I'm not, obviously
Okay.
not objecting, but just to make sure you have the full information, is that since we're doing it without a canopy, the assumption is that since Sunday, the 21st is Father's Day, is that the rain date would be the following Saturday, the 27th, and with a double rain date of Sunday, the 28th. You know, and if we have monsoon season, then of course we can go into the week, but
Okay.
hopefully not.
I believe I heard the fire chief wants to do a chicken barbecue an hour or so after the kind of what we thought the end of the town meeting would be, that for two reasons. First of all, everybody would be in town and they're ready to, pick up their chicken on their way home or whatever. And secondly, to make sure that the town meeting didn't last too long because they knew their chicken was waiting for them. So there's an idea for you.
And Wayne, is there going to be, I assume you're going to have a sound system, a pretty size sound system?
Yes, I'm happy to
You
go
don't have to
into
give
any
me a-
further.
No, you don't.
Yeah,
I
the
just
answer, yes, but I mean, and there are a range of other things that our committee discussed. And so I'll answer any questions you want. There are one or two things that I do want to bring up, but they're sort of post the decision that, yes, you want to go ahead and have the meeting on the 20th.
Do we need a formal motion, Kate? Or do
Yeah, I would like to, I really want to nail this down, and I would just soon have the motion because this way it makes it, a little more.
Okay.
There's a motion in the packet, but the date is still the 23rd, so that would have to be amended to Saturday, June 20th. And also the motion calls for deleting Article 11, which is the operating budget. So if that could be excised from the motion so that 11 would stay in, we'd have the 16 articles that you agreed to plus the operating budget. So it'd be 17 in total.
Right, and add in the 2 rain dates.
Yes, yes, right.
Tim, does that include voting the revolving funds?
It does.
Okay, just wanted to make sure because you'd have to vote those too.
Tuesday, okay.
Well,
So
okay.
do you have this printed, did anybody have this printed out? So
It
can
should.
I,
No, do you want to?
so can I get a motion, please, that the Board of Selectmen vote to reopen the annual town meeting warrant closed on March 10th, 2020 for the purpose of removing Articles 14, 16, 17, 18, 20, 21, 22, 24, 26, and 27, renumbering the remaining articles in sequential order, and to close said warrant for the annual town meeting to be held on Saturday, June 20th, with rain dates of June 27th and 28th. June 27th and 28th on the outdoor plaza of the Carlisle Public School adjacent to the Spalding Building, and to reaffirm the rescheduling of the annual town election for Tuesday, June 30th, 2020, all based upon the draft warrants presented this evening and all subject to final review by town council and the town administrator as to language and form. That was a question. Do I have a motion for that?
Sorry, one quick thing. Did you have to add in the piece about and the operating budget?
I did.
Sorry. I didn't hear that. So moved.
Second.
Okay, and I'll explain how I did that. We were excising, before we were excising the operation budget. That was Article 11, and I did not
Gotcha.
excise it this time.
Okay.
So Barney moved that, and Nathan, you seconded it? Did I see that? Okay. All right, so any further discussion? Roll call.
Arnold, I.
Oscar Lilloye.
Brown eye.
Alan, you muted? Or I can hear
Oh,
you.
okay. Yeah, Louis, nay. Yep.
Nay? Okay. I'll go read aye. All right.
Can I just go back to something that I think it was Tim that mentioned it? I guess I worry about the town kind of sponsoring things that might get people together. So I worry if the fire department is going to have a chicken barbecue down at the fire department, that we're going to get people walking all the way, from the school down to the fire station. And
Yeah.
I just don't think the town should be doing things that might encourage people not to be socially distant.
Okay, that's so noted. I think it was going to be planned in order to be socially distant, that people would have to drive by in order to pick up the chicken, and there would be circles on Spalding Field for them if they wanted to picnic on the field, but they'd have to stay in their circle, which were going to be socially
Okay, all right.
spaced. And it might not end up being on that date. It might be at some other date, but it would be socially. It's going to go through the Emergency Planning Commission before it gets totally brought forward. All right. So Victor, you know what you have to do now, and you have to do it. Okay.
Yep.
We finalized town meeting warrant and we set the date and time. Oh my God.
So Kate,
Yes.
if we could just take 2 more minutes, and if Victor, if you could stay on as well.
Yep.
So one of the important things that my advisory committee was talking about was that even though that perhaps fewer people will turn out, especially given the circumstances of the year, that it's very important that we get information out to the public so that people know what's going on, and so that even if they choose not to come, they're making a choice where at least they are informed about what's going on in the town. So what we discussed is to have a more fulsome public information going out in advance, and I had done some exploration to see whether we could have basically a town forum hosted on the town website, where the not only the warrant articles would be posted, but that supplementary information, for example, presentation about the complete streets, any possibly asking the proponents of articles to record a short, 5-minute video about what it's about. So almost in effect, you're doing town meeting in advance. The board of directors of the Mosquito said, gee, we serve an information function in the town. We'd be happy to host that. And after mulling it over, I've concluded that that's a very kind offer, that we ought to take the Mosquito up on. It's a traditional role of newspapers in this country, but the Mosquito, one of the relative few that actually carries it on of helping to inform the public. That's actually what the First Amendment was all about in the first place. And so we should do that. What it would require, though, and I'm not asking the Board of Selectmen to order anyone, but certainly to encourage, it's really, really important that the proponents of the articles not wait until the last minute, that they in fact prepare materials. And I realize, of course, FinCom has now got to scramble and put together a budget fairly quickly. So that's understood, but certainly for anything around the other articles, getting that information in to the Mosquito sooner rather than later. And then the Mosquito plans to host, allow people to have an online discussion forum, and having, you'd have to sort of figure out if there's a particular committee associated with something, designate an official, but it would be encouraged to have some participation of the actual elected or appointed officials who are relevant, so that there could be some back and forth. So in effect, you get a lot more digital participation, even if it's not at the meeting itself. And I do think I totally agree with the concerns that FinCom raised, that the legitimacy of how we do this is really important to the town on an ongoing basis. I think that's a very high concern. And I think that cooperating with the mosquito to get this done will serve the town very well going forward. So I would ask for the selectmen to support that approach, and as I said, to encourage whatever relevant town boards and committees and employees to assist with getting things done. It does require, though, the information has to get to the mosquito, and sort of the thing of committees putting together their proposals on the Sunday before Monday town meeting, that can't fly this year.
So Article 16, increasing the town moderator's term for 3 years, you're going to do that one, right?
No, I said I'm neutral on that. That was your favorite one. But I will comment
I thought it was
on it.
moderator for life.
If people ask me my opinion, I will certainly chime in on that.
No, I certainly agree with you that we have to get this information out. And I have to say, I not to speak for the board, but I think that we were already trying to take that sort of a step by insisting that there were summaries at the end of each of the articles in the warrant to begin with.
Yes.
Do you think we should, so here's the question, do you think we should try to beef up those summaries a bit more than they already are?
Yeah, I think wherever possible, I think it's important to do that. And, you know, I would, in a lot of other towns, what you're seeing is people in effect recording, you know, they do a dry run of the presentation that they would give a town meeting, and record that and upload it. And I would encourage people to keep their presentations to less than the 8 minutes that I normally give them, because people don't have that much patience in watching a video screen, but it's going to be really important. So for example, this decision that you've just made to say, okay, we're going to carry forward last year's budget, having some sort of, maybe you do Kate and Victor and Tim, the three of you sit around for 10 minutes and have a discussion sort of explaining how that works and what it means.
Hey, Wayne, is the meeting going to be live and broadcast?
Yes, our expectation, subject to some final, confirming details, but I think that the school has the necessary connections that would enable, I'm sorry, what do we call it now?
Minuteman Network. Yeah.
Minuteman Network to be able to live broadcast. And one thing that I'm looking into, something that's been done in a number of other towns, is to provide a mechanism for people who are not attending the meeting to send questions in, so that if someone actually has, they won't be able to vote, but if someone has a question that's important, that could be posed and it could be answered. So we're looking into that. As a general rule, trying to expand participation as much as we're able to.
But in the past, I mean, the precedent was set that those who were seated in the lunchroom, not in the meeting room, but ancillary, were able to participate. You can't.
Oh, well,
that footprint to some other places.
They were physically at the same location. They're at the school at that point.
Well, we have a CAF. I mean, would we entertain making it as convenient as possible for as many people as possible to participate? Does it have to be school grounds?
The problem is that you need, we need to have a live audio connection.
Yep.
And then I'd need to appoint an assistant moderator to regulate the proceedings and to count the votes. And quite honestly, we're going to need the help of 5 times as many people as we normally have to run a town meeting to pull it off just on the
Yeah.
plaza. And so to add locations really complicates it. And I'm not certain that I'm not sure what it does to open up the cafeteria.
Yeah, okay. I want to ask another question of Kate. So Wayne made an important point about mosquito communication. You know, speaking for the 2/3 of the budget dollar that goes to the different school districts, I definitely think we should have a meeting. First of all, we should have a meeting sooner rather than later with the BOS and the two different school committees, but especially the Carlisle School Committee, so that there's a real understanding of what's going on in the process and what that means, because that's the biggest single expenditures we all know. So that's my request, is that as soon as possible, now that you've made your decision, we should have that joint meeting.
Well, yeah.
And,
Well,
and
we'll
so
get
everybody's kind of on the same page with the message.
Okay. So and that should be
Victor,
done probably with Victor and Tim
Yeah, FinCom as well, of course.
and yeah. Okay. David?
Yep. Oh,
I'm sorry.
Question for Wayne, as soon as possible is vague enough to be problematical. Can we get actual dates by which something has to be in, both in terms of whatever the mosquito is going to do, but also Tim with regard to expanded summaries for the warrant articles, so that we can make sure it's much more likely to get done if we say it has to be done by X. And as one who's going to have to do these things, I'd like to know, when they have to be done by.
Tim, you should go first on what you need.
Well, I guess I'm thinking that we'd be ready to post this warrant probably early next week. I would hope by the end of next week, perhaps we'd have information from article proponents in terms of expanded summaries. We do have summaries now. They're, they may not be, that comprehensive, or they could be beefed up certainly. But to put a date on it, maybe is June 5th, the Friday after this one? I mean, if the meeting is,
Yeah.
if we're talking the 20th, I think we got to do it inside of 2 weeks.
Absolutely.
right.
Yeah.
You're going to mail the warrant, right?
I think that's still the plan.
Yeah.
So when are you mailing the warrant?
To be honest, we haven't even got a date from the printer yet, because we didn't know we were gonna, when it was going out. I mean, the legal requirement is not that the warrant be mailed. I mean, it's the posting is the legal requirement. So if we're putting information up on the website and
Yeah, and I think
elsewhere.
I think mailing is critical, and June 5th sounds too generous in terms of the summaries to me. I would say by Monday, just in terms of thinking of getting it mailed, but it's up to you. But
Yeah, no, I mean, that's certainly possible. I mean, we've got 17 articles, and half of those articles are the consent agenda. So we're not talking about the longest warrant in the world. So, I mean, earlier in the week is probably doable.
well,
Yeah, I would certainly sort of speaking up for the sort of the public interest in being informed. I would agree with David's observation that Monday, June the 1st, and I know that the mosquitoes concern, similar, they want to be able to get things posted as soon as reasonably practical, so that the people have the chance to inform themselves.
Right.
Well, I was just thinking that the mosquito, I don't know if there's a mosquito reporter on now, but if in this week's online version, they said that, on X date, we will be starting to host this, that would be great. And if that could be decided, by tomorrow morning or something, to let them know so they could, again, I don't know if there's a mosquito reporter on, but.
Yeah, Mary Lynn is on.
Okay.
They will know by first thing in the morning, and I'm sure they'll be making their decisions. So getting things done by early next week, by June 1st, I think would be ideal from that perspective. And obviously, you know, so adding things. So for example, if you're going to do a video or that sort of thing, you know, that could come a little bit later. You know, no harm in that, but getting the basic materials out so that the site can go live is very important. You know, but having said that, you know, just to be clear, one of the advantages of saying yes to the mosquitoes thing is the town explicitly is not in control of it, and we're just relying on the mosquitoes' good judgment, and you know, proceeds that way.
And like Victor, for the FinCom, would you also anticipate like having a FinCom hearing on the operating budget before the June 10th meeting?
So I think from my perspective, I think we would largely keep to the normal process, and certainly we can have discussion around this. Where we do have an in-person, we typically have an in-person hearing where we actually do the presentation that we would present at town meeting, and then obviously have discussion with the individuals that participate. So I need to, I was writing down on my pad here, you know, so now that we have finalized the decision on town meeting, I have to schedule that hearing. And I think that would probably be the best forum to have. Anything that we have in terms of materials, we can certainly post it as well. But I think, you know, we're going to do the hearing. It's going to be a presentation. I think typically it's 10 days, at least 10 days in advance. So I think it's not too far after the dates that we're talking about from the mosquito perspective.
Okay. Any other discussion?
On the expanded summaries in the warrant, are there designated individuals who are writing those?
Not yet.
Most of the summaries were written by the proponents of the articles themselves, so I'll be contacting them tomorrow
So they're all going to be pro?
to ask them. Well, I think generally they run that way when you go to the proponents. I don't know if we could find opponents to all of them to write a summary at this late date, but there are explanations of what the article would do, not what it wouldn't do, I suppose, or what wouldn't happen if it wasn't passed.
It's not an advocacy piece, it's an explanation. It's not why vote for it, it's what you're voting for.
Right.
There are some towns that do post pro and con advocacy pieces in their warrant, and it is, we've maintained that distinction, and that's part of why, you know, traditionally you know, we've tried to keep it more factual.
Yeah, no, I know. A lot of places say, if you vote yes, this is what it means. If you vote no, this is what it means.
Yeah. I would just say then it's more important than ever then for the mosquito to try, when they're, you know, encouraging these forum discussions, to have people that have differing views.
Okay. Anything else? I think we need to be moving on. Okay. We have liaison reports. Anybody with liaison reports?
I did go to the election committee meeting today, but I think that's pretty well been covered. The things we discussed, which essentially was setting the date. Really, a postcard is going out to everybody in town, explaining the process, highly recommending early or absentee ballot voting, so that we try to minimize the number of people who actually physically come to town hall on election day, and where they can get the applications and that sort of thing. So that's all happening as we speak.
Great. I was at the Municipal Facilities Committee. And I just want to remind everybody that there is a sewage breakout on the site, and that we've been in the midst of doing engineering for a new septic for that site. So most of the engineering is all done. There are some documents, I guess, at town councils for approval, some easement documents in order to cite this, the new system in a spot which will then enable us to open about 14 acres of landlocked land that we own back there but have never had access to. So I just want to let you know.
Sorry, where is this?
On the DPW site.
Oh, all right, thanks.
So just want to, alert you that there'll be probably some expenses coming down for both the engineering and then hopefully shortly for the installation of this new septic so that people won't have to be crossing and recrossing over poop. So.
Nice green grass though.
They'll say the grass is always greener.
Yeah, yeah. But it's very close to the refueling site, so everybody's driving through it and walking through it, and so it's kind of nasty. So, okay, that's it.
Yeah, so just real quick with CPC, I think since we're gonna have a later town meeting, we'll probably open up for applications again. We did get a request from a couple of different people after the deadline had passed. And, Tom, can we do that, Tom? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it just, thank you, Tom. I still haven't seen the new office, by the way. But no,
It
I
hasn't
think it makes
moved. You
sense.
just got to stop by.
Yeah, okay. Well, when all this stuff ends, maybe. Yeah. But yeah, I think it makes sense. We had a couple of people ping me after the deadline had passed, so might as well open it up. We got the time, so.
Yeah, I know. For instance, there's the bell tower clock and the bell tower. It would be really nice to use CPC funds for that. So
Yeah.
Town funds.
Yeah. Oh, really? Oh, okay. Yeah.
Well, because the town owns that clock.
Right, but it's historic, right?
And it's historic, so
Yeah.
it would be
So
nice.
We'll talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think it's been used before. But anyway, so that'll come back out. I don't know exactly when I got to ping the committee and all that stuff, and but we've got the time, so might as well.
Good. All right. I see any more liaison reports? I need a motion to move to executive session, not to return to open session.
Hi.
Can I ask one more, Kate?
Sorry, sure. David, you're
Interrupt. I should have jumped in earlier, but for Victor and Kim and council, maybe not on anymore. So if the guideline budget for 2020, that's voted, and then in the fall, Concord votes a higher budget, what happens on that scenario? Did we cover that one? Because then the two
For the,
budgets won't be in alignment.
Yep. For the
Tom maybe
regional you
knows
talked
this
about,
answer.
David?
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so if Concord votes a higher budget than what we approve, we need to reconvene a town meeting to discuss the budget.
All right. So we understand that. We
Yeah,
understand that
I can forward you.
after Concord's
email.
fall. Well, I just want people to be aware. It sounds like
We did discuss that, Dave.
We did. And we were looking at a fall town meeting, a special town meeting anyway in the fall. So it's not going to be
okay.
a horrible problem, hopefully. We'll be able to take care of, yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I missed that. My apologies. Thank you.
Okay.
So I move that the board enter into executive session pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, Paragraph 1, to hear a complaint against the public officer, Police Chief John Fisher, and that afterwards the board will not return to open session.
Second.
Okay, I need a roll call. Arnold, aye.
Basculin, aye.
Brown eye.
Louis, I.
Reed, aye. Okay, thank
Are we
you.
going-